Okay, so perfect. So hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à notre troisième atelier, the third workshop. The title is l'importance du travail d'équipe, construire une culture d'excellence avec conférencier d'invité Professeur Gordon Bloom. So the third workshop is the importance of teamwork, building a culture of excellence. The guest speaker is Dr. Gordon Bloom. Um, so how we're going to proceed today, we just to kindly respect our professor, we like that your screens be on so he can see your face. But if you're not in a case of having your screen on, it's okay. But just to respect our professor, to be a nice gesture to do, to leave your screens on. Fait que par acte de gentillesse, s'il vous plaît, laissez vos écrans allumés pour qu'on puisse vous voir et surtout pour respect, pour montrer votre respect à professeur Bloom. Fait que c'est un acte de gentillesse, OK? Fait que avant qu'on commence, juste pour informer tout le monde, l'atelier est enregistré. And number two, le dernier 10 minutes, on va laisser pour le temps de questionnement si vous avez des questions. Fait qu'on réserve le 10 dernières minutes pour les questions. Fait qu'on va laisser Professeur Bloom faire son présentation, puis le 10 dernières minutes, ça va être vraiment pour le temps des questions. So we're going to let Dr. Bloom have his presentation, and in the last 10 minutes will be reserved for all the questions that you guys have. The questions will be bilingual, but the presentation will be done in English by Dr. Bloom. Fait que la présentation va être en anglais. On peut avoir les traductions sur le côté qui va être faite par Shirley. Fait que si vous voulez de traduction de côté, ça va être fait via le chat sur le côté en français par Shirley. Fait qu'on va commencer. Je vais donner la parole à Fatimata pour le mot de bienvenue en français. Go.
Parfait. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Au nom du comité étudiant, j'aimerais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cet atelier dédié à l'importance du travail d'équipe, construire une culture d'excellence. Nous vous remercions chaleureusement de votre présence et votre intérêt pour cet atelier qui a été pensé pour vous offrir des outils pratiques, mais aussi un espace d'échange sur la collaboration, la communication et la mise en place d'une culture qui valorise l'excellence et la cohésion dans nos équipes de recherche. Nous espérons que vous profiterez de cette occasion pour approfondir vos connaissances et renforcer vos liens avec vos collègues et mentors. Alors, je vais donner la parole à Shirley pour vous souhaiter la bienvenue en anglais. Merci.
Hi, everyone. On behalf of the student committee, I would like to welcome you to our workshop on the importance of teamwork, building a culture of excellence. We warmly thank you for your presence and interest in this workshop, which has been designed to provide you with practical tools and a space for exchanging ideas on collaboration, communication, and fostering a culture that values excellence and cohesion within our research team. We hope that you take advantage of this opportunity to deepen your knowledge and strengthen your connections with colleagues and mentors. I will also just make a note that if you do require translation in French, to just write it in the chat because I will be translating per demand. So just let me know if that is needed. But like Sue said, the conference will be provided in English. So enjoy your workshop. Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to introduce, obviously, our guest speaker, Dr. Bloom. So today we're honored to welcome Dr. Bloom, a distinguished expert in sports psychology and sociology with a career dedicated in understanding and enhancing leadership, mentoring, and team building in high-performance sports. With academic roots in sociology and sports psychology and a current role at McGill University and the Institut National du Québec, Sport du Québec, Dr. Bloom has worked extensively with Olympic and Paralympic athletes, professional teams, and throughout the U.S. national team coach leader and education program. His focus is on fostering cultures of excellence that promote both success and well-being among athletes. We look forward to hearing more about his inspiring journey and starting the workshop number 3, the importance of teamwork, building a culture of excellence. So please welcome Dr. Bloom. La présentation, alors c'est une French, présentation de notre conférencier du jour, Professeur Bloom. Aujourd'hui, nous avons l'honneur d'accueillir le Professeur Bloom, un expert distingué en psychologie et sociologie du sport, avec une carrière dédiée à la compréhension et à l'amélioration du leadership, du mentorat, du renforcement de l'équipe dans le sport à haute performance. Avec des racines académiques en sociologie et en psychologie du sport, et des rôles actuels à l'Université de McGill et à l'Institut national du sport du Québec, Professeur Bloom a travaillé intensément avec des athlètes olympiques et paralympiques, des équipes professionnelles et à travers le programme de formation des entraîneurs de l'équipe des nationales des États-Unis. Il se concentre sur la création des cultures d'excellence qui favorisent à la fois le succès et le bien-être des athlètes. Nous avons hâte d'en savoir plus de son parcours inspirant et de commencer l'atelier 3, qui est l'importance du travail d'équipe, construire une culture d'excellence. Fait que veuillez acquérir chaleureusement le professeur Bloom.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Sue, Fatimata, and Shirley for those kind words. Very happy to be here today, and thanks to the entire Career Organizing Committee for welcoming me. I realize today that our viewership is multidisciplinary, so although I come from kinesiology and physical education background, I'm hoping that what I have to talk about today really carries over to people in different facets that outside of sport. If you're working in a research lab, or certainly if you're working in a business or may one day work, I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, how to build a culture of excellence, should have relevance to everyone. So I've been asked to sort of tell you a little bit more about myself before we get going. And I'll do that. I've got a little workshop quiz for you. And then I'm going to share some insights on how to build a culture of excellence. And then I'll have time for questions at the end. So again, you know, a lot of the research that we do in my lab looks at how to build and lead a high performance culture of excellence. And we do draw upon research in business and organizational psychology, and I'm going to share a lot of that with you. But really the focus of the work that I do is the role of the team leader or the coach or the boss or the CEO on how they can cultivate these cultures of excellence in their teams, because our research has found that the leader or the coach does make a difference in how people enjoy their experience, but also how they perform in high pressure environments. So I'm going to share some of that research with you. Again, I was asked just to give a quick bio of myself. So there's the schools where I studied and the programs. I've been at McGill since 2000. After my Ph.D., I worked in California for 4 years. And I've been here at 2000 all the time in the Department of Kinesiology and Physical Education. And I'm currently the department chair as well. So I work in the Curry Gymnasium building, which if you look at the picture in the top right-hand corner, right near the football stadium, that's where we're situated. And not everybody gets up to the northeast part of campus. So I just wanted to give you a view of where I work and where I'm situated. Also, right next to that picture is a recent picture of people that are working in my lab. And I always like to give a shout out to them because they are really the fuel that drives the engine. And I'm very fortunate to have a great group of graduate students, some of whom are actually on this call today, and not because I forced them to, right, guys? Again, so my area is sports psychology. We have a lab, and I'll share a lot of the research that comes from that. I'm also a coach. I've been a youth sport coach for 20 years. I figure the best way to learn about being a coach and being a leader is to be involved in it. So I have 3 children who've been involved in youth sport, my 2 boys and my daughter. And I've coached all their teams in hockey, baseball, and soccer. And I think that helps me do research by actually being out in the field as a participant. So one of the things that I love about sports psychology is that it's an applied field. So I've been very fortunate over the years. The title that we use is actually not sports psychologist, it's mental performance consultant, or MPC. So I am a certified mental performance consultant in Canada. I'm part of our organization called the Canadian Sports Psychology Association. And in my 30 years working, over 30 years now, working in sports psychology, I've had a lot of applied experiences working with various teams and athletes. The picture at the top there is the group that I work with here at McGill. Those are the people that are working with a number of our varsity teams, and I oversee the mental training program with our varsity athletes at McGill. In the middle are 4 people that have coached and or played for Team Canada and all studied here at McGill and studied in our department. And the person on the far right, Charlene Labonte, who has 3 gold medals to her name, not only did her undergraduate here at McGill, but was also a graduate student in my lab, so I know her quite well. And I've worked in professional sport, and there's a picture of myself and my son when I was working for the Montreal Canadiens in the NHL. And I can share that because it was public knowledge. So there's a lot of applied work, and what I'm going to share with you today on how to create a culture of excellence really will draw upon a lot of the applied experiences I've had. One very quick summary before I get started is just how do I describe my research or what I do, just to sort of situate it for you before I get into how to create a culture of excellence. So I summarize it as the knowledge, strategies, and behaviors employed by coaches in terms of leadership practices, mentoring, and team building that are designed to create a culture of excellence that includes the development of successful and well-balanced athletes. And that's really important, the work that we do in my lab. It's not about performance success. Really, what we try and do is see how a coach can help an athlete feel good about his or her experience in high performance settings. Because if you feel good and you're in a good mindset, usually the performance comes from itself. And I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have met some of the top coaches, certainly in North America. And there's 2 of them that I put up on this screen who I studied a lot about and had the very good fortune of meeting. 2 of the most successful North American university team sport coaches. There's John Wooden, who was a men's basketball coach. And next to me in the other photo is Anson Dorrance, who's a women's soccer coach, and learned a lot from interacting with these coaches. So teamwork. So what I want to do before I get into sort of my applied activity and before I get into sort of some research nuggets is just set up for you why I think teamwork is so important and why I think it's important to create cultures of excellence. And I'm going to give you some real life examples in the sports setting of some of the most successful teams and what some of the players or the coaches from the most successful teams have said about teamwork. Because I just think the environment is the key to success of any organization or team. And I don't think it's just a sport team. I think if you're working in a lab, if you're in a lab environment at the university, do you have a toxic lab or do you have a cohesive lab where people work and support each other? I mean, I'm very fortunate. We have a great lab, and sometimes you worry, do people get jealous if somebody gets an award and someone else doesn't? And our lab is very supportive and recognizes and encourages excellence in everyone. And we learned that from teams. So one of the teams that I followed, the best hockey team in my lifetime was the Edmonton Oilers. And they had a player on their team who's widely regarded as the greatest hockey player of all time, Wayne Gretzky. So there was another player on that team, Mark Messier, who's pictured in the slide. And Mark Messier is one of the greatest hockey players of all time. But when he played on Wayne Gretzky's team, he was never going to be the guy. He was always going to be number 2 to Gretzky, and he would have been number 1 on arguably almost every other team had he played on a team that didn't have Gretzky on it. But this is what Mark Messier said: "I never felt I was playing in Gretzky's shadow. I had a responsibility on the team that was different from Wayne's. Everyone had his role, and I felt great about mine. So did many others about theirs. If we won, and we won often, we know everyone would get respect." This is from an old football coach. Said this over 100 years ago, and I think it's a great quote, and it's very simple, but you have to take your time to read it. "The secret to winning football games is working more as a team, less as individuals. I play not my 11 best players, but my best 11 players." And again, that's sort of reinforcing the importance of talent only gets you so far, but it's really cohesion and teamwork and cultures of excellence that help you win championships. And here's some more examples. So this is one from one of the greatest coaches that I've ever learned from, Pat Riley. He wrote a book. I don't know if you can see it. So it's a book. It's called The Winner Within. And it was about his time when he was coaching the Los Angeles Lakers dynasty in the 80s and the 90s. He's pictured there with Magic Johnson, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was on his team. And this was just an incredibly talented team. And I read his book, and I really learned about the importance and the value that he placed on teamwork. And I'm going to read one quote from his book for you. Teamwork is the essence of life. If there's one thing on which I'm an authority, it's how to blend the talents and strengths of individuals into a force that becomes greater than the sum of its parts. My driving belief is this: great teamwork is the only way to reach our ultimate moments, to create the breakthroughs that define our careers, to fulfill our lives with a sense of lasting significance. However, teamwork isn't simple. In fact, it can be a frustrating, elusive commodity. That's why there are so many bad teams out there stuck in neutral or going downhill. Teamwork doesn't appear magically just because someone mouths the words. Really, really profound statement by Coach Riley. And like I said, there's a lot more of that in his book, The Winner Within. That was one of the first coaching books I read, along with one from John Wooden, that really influenced the way I think. Another very successful team is the Chicago Bulls, and they had on it the greatest player of all time. No offense, LeBron James, but I'm sticking with him, is MJ, Michael Jordan. And they won a lot of championships. So for me, it was, let's read as much as I can. Let's read what Michael Jordan said, and let's read what his coach Phil Jackson said. And this is a quote from Michael Jordan, and then I'll read you a quote from his coach Phil Jackson. Naturally, there are going to be ups and downs, particularly if you're trying to achieve at a high level. But when we stepped between the lines, we knew what we were capable of doing. When a pressure situation presented itself, we were plugged into one another as a cohesive unit. That's why we were able to beat more talented teams. So that's what Michael Jordan said. It was really interesting about what his coach Phil Jackson said, because when Phil Jackson was hired to coach the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan was the dominant player in the NBA. But how many titles had Michael Jordan won before Phil Jackson took over? 0. And he was leading the NBA in points. He was magical. They never won a championship. So here's what Phil Jackson said about taking over a team that had Michael Jordan on it, the greatest player in the team, with no championships. I flash back to 1989 when I took over as head coach, and I talked to Michael about how I wanted him to share the spotlights with his teammates so the team can grow and flourish. In those days, he was a gifted young athlete with enormous confidence in his own abilities that had to be cajoled into making sacrifices for the team. Now he was an older, wiser player who understood that it wasn't brilliant individual performances that made great teams, but the energy that's unleashed when players put their egos aside and work towards a common goal. So that came from a book by Phil Jackson. I'll show you the book. It's a little harder to see. It's called Sacred Hoops, Spiritual Lessons of a Hardwood Warrior. And again, that was a book that really influenced me, because Phil Jackson basically said before he got there, the team was, they called the Michael and the Jordan-heirs. So everybody just kind of followed Michael Jordan. And Michael Jordan didn't have to share the team and share the ball. But when Phil Jackson came over, he implemented a new philosophy called the triangle offense, where you would share the ball. And he basically went to Michael. He says, do you want to win a championship or do you want to win scoring titles? And like Phil Jackson said, the greatest thing for his career was when Michael said, I want to win titles. And then Phil said, if you're going to do that, you're going to have to score less and you're going to have to make your teammates better. and the rest is history. And I really do think a lot of Michael Jordan's greatness can be attributed to having Phil Jackson as his coach. So after he coached the Bulls, Phil Jackson went to the Los Angeles Lakers, who had two very talented players on their team, the young Kobe Bryant and the more seasoned Shaquille O'Neal. And a quote from Kobe Bryant said, "If leaving the Lakers at the end of the season is what I decide, a major reason for that will be Shaq's childless selfishness and jealousy." Whoa, stinging words. And as I wrote below, together, Kobe and Shaq won 3 NBA titles for the Lakers. But in the year where they had the tiff, which is where the quote above came from, the team ended up ranking 5th. They did not win. Shaq was traded, and arguably Shaq didn't win another championship. And it took Kobe 7 years, arguably, to understand about teamwork and bringing other players better and having Phil Jackson work with him. So these are just some examples that I wanted to start off my presentation with, just to enforce the value and the power of teamwork, as said from the eyes of the players and coaches who have been a part of the greatest dynasties that I've watched in sports in the last 40 years. So that's setting us up. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit fun before I share some research with you about how to create cultures of excellence. I'm going to give you 4 slides. And in each slide, I'm going to ask you to rank yourself A, B, C, D, or E. So it's only 4. Hopefully you can remember this. And then after I give you the 4 questions and you remember your answers, I'll interpret them for you and tell you what they mean. So this is where you get to play and get involved. And again, if you're not on a sports team, you could say, if I was on a sports team, this is who I would be. Or maybe it relates to a team environment that you're in at work, in a lab, in a business setting, somewhere else, and you want to put yourself in those shoes. However you want to understand this, you're welcome to do it. So here we go. So describe the best option for you. So the first question is, when working in a team, I prefer to A, take the lead and make decisions. B, support the leader and ensure tasks are completed. C, provide creative ideas and solutions. D, focus on building relationships and keeping the morale high. Or E, analyze and assess the situation before taking action. Give you a few seconds in case you want to read it over. Okay. Question 2 is about motivation. I am most motivated in a team when I am in a position to lead and guide others. I am given clear tasks and responsibilities. C, I have freedom to explore new ideas. D, I feel connected and valued by my teammates. And E, the goals are well defined and aligned with a strategic plan. So, what motivates you? Question about handling conflict, which is going to be, I will say, the focus of the second part of my presentation. So we're going to get to this soon. But in case of a disagreement with the team, I, A, address the issue head on and try and resolve it quickly. B, seek a compromise that benefits everyone. C, look for new ways to solve the problem that others might not have considered. D, try to keep the peace and avoid conflict as much as possible. And E, analyze the root cause of the conflict before suggesting a solution. All right, approaching to team success. I believe a successful team is built on A, clear leadership and direction. B, hard work and diligence from each member. C, creativity and thinking outside the box. D, strong relationships and mutual respect, and E, a deep understanding of strategy and planning. Okay, I think that was the 4 questions that I wanted to ask you. So now I'm going to show you the slide that will help interpret how you've evaluated yourself. So what type of a person are you on the team? And I will say there's no right or wrong answers. There's no better answer here. It's just who you are, and I'll kind of explain that in a minute when I show you the interpretation. So hopefully there was some consistency in your results. You chose A, B, C, D, or E consistently across the board. If you didn't, well, I can't help you on that one right now, but I was going with the fact that most people tended to answer in a similar way, because traits tend to go across the personality. So here it is. If you answered A for most of the questions, you are defined as the leader. You thrive in guiding the team toward its goals. You take charge naturally and are often seen as a source of direction and decision making. If you answered primarily B, you are the doer. You are reliable and focused on getting the job done. You make sure tasks are completed on time and help keep the team on track. If you answered C, you are the innovator. You bring creativity and new perspectives to the team. You enjoy thinking outside the box and finding novel solutions to challenges. If you answer D, you are classified as the supporter. You are the heart of the team, ensuring that everyone feels included and valued. You prioritize team harmony and work to maintain a positive atmosphere. And if you primarily answered E, you are the strategist. You like to take a step back and assess the situation before taking action. You are focused on planning and analyzing to ensure the team's long-term success. So again, there's not one that's better than the other. And I think a mix of everything is probably best for a team, but that would be another conversation, and I'm afraid we don't have that much time here. So what I'm going to do is move into how to create a culture of excellence. But before I do, I just want to remind you about a comment that Michael Jordan said again to me, probably the greatest athlete I've ever watched in my life, team sport athlete. And he said, talent wins games, but teamwork wins championships. So if that's true, if MJ is spot on, how do we create this positive team environment, or what I've found is called this culture of excellence? That's what I'm going to share with you for the next 20 minutes. I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that. I've actually got 4 takeaway messages that you'll get. So to lead into where I'm going with this, I want you to know where I got a lot of my research and inspiration from. There's a line of research that's called serial winning coaches. And the 2 authors who really coined the term are listed there, both of whom I know quite well. And they basically conducted a study on the greatest compilation of successful coaches in the history of coaching science research. They got access to the most successful, as far as winning Olympic and world championship coaches in the world, coach that had coached individual sports, team sports, men's sports, women's sports. So they got this compilation of coaches, from access to the coaches from around the entire world who'd had the most success on the field of play. And they summarized a lot of what they found. And I've only picked, a few points here to talk to you about, because we don't have all day, but just to give you a quick snapshot of what are the characteristics of the most successful coaches in the world historically, is as follows. 1, they have an obsessive passion for the pursuit of coaching excellence. 2, they have in-depth personal reflection. 3, they have high emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence basically means you can read the room. You understand what's going on with the people on your team. They have a quest for continuous improvement. And look at this. Lo and behold, one of their findings was there's the importance of creating and sustaining a culture of excellence. I think these 5 terms really are generic and carry over to life. If some of you look at the most successful people that you've been around, maybe people that have been your superior, so either a boss, a lab leader, a professor. If you look at some, because I kind of look at these findings and I transport them to other areas of life and I say, is this what it takes to be excellent in your field? And I really think that it does. And again, some people here may have some other areas. There may be there's more to their research that I didn't talk about. You know, one of them is caring about your athletes as people and not just using them to be successful in sport. But I didn't have time to put them all up. And the only one that I'm going to talk about today is the last part, which is creating and sustaining a culture of excellence. So they talk a little bit about it in their book, but they do say it's a key common finding of successful coaches. And I'm going to talk to you about one study in particular in our lab. But before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to this one study who I did with one of my recently graduated master's students, Madison Fraser. And we collaborated with Cliff Mallett from Australia, who was one of the authors on the serial winning coaches I just mentioned a minute ago. And what we did for her study was really interesting. So we looked at serial winning coaches in Canada from university sport, but we looked at them from the angle as we know you've won tons of championships. We made them pick a season when their performance went off the rails and when they had a poor culture, because normally their culture was excellent, they were winning, and we made them look at their culture when it was poor and things didn't go well. And I don't have time to share the findings, but it was an interesting study. And if any of you would like to read this study, if you just reach out and send me an email, I'll be happy to send it to you. One of the most interesting studies I've done on serial winning coaches, but not the one I'm going to share with you today. So this is the one I've chosen to share. Again, we've done a fair bit of studies on how to build a culture of excellence. And I thought one that would be interesting for a multidisciplinary audience like today is how to deal with difficult athletes. So I'm going to talk to you about a story about Liam Heelis, who was one of my graduate students. I'll tell you a little bit about his story and who he was in a second. But the one thing we need to know, again, this is where it goes into business and it goes into sport, is the 80-20 rule. So and there's a lot of research in business about this, which basically says managers and employees find themselves spending approximately 80% of their time dealing with 20% of their athletes, dealing with difficult employees, conflict, and discipline. And there's been a little bit of research in sport. And one study said if I spend 80% of my time with the negative players, not enough time is spent on reinforcing positive and good behaviors. So there's quite a bit of literature in the business and organizational psychology domain that talks about how to deal with difficult employees. And I guarantee that everybody who's sitting on this call has either been in a workspace environment, maybe a lab, a class, or on a sports team where you've had a difficult athlete. So the question is, what was done about it? Was this something that persisted? Was it something that ruined the team? Because all of the teams that I spoke about earlier, it was clear that, of course, there was ego clashes. And in the case of Kobe and Shaq, they had to actually split from each other. But in most other cases, they were resolved and people worked amicably and achieved performance success. So I'm going to talk to you about this story. And let me just tell you about my student who came to do this study. So his name was Liam Heelis, and he did his undergraduate studies in the Maritimes. And he was in his last year of undergrad. He was voted the top player of the year in Canada. He was the top player. Very, very incredibly talented hockey player. And he still had 1 year of eligibility left. And when he reached out to me, he says, you know, my career goal is to become a coach when I retire. and I'd like to come and study coaching and still play my last year of eligibility, with the McGill hockey team as a first-year master's student, and then I'd like to move into coaching. And I thought, okay, this is great. Liam had played for Team Canada at one point, and he was the hockey player of the year. So he's a very, very talented hockey player. He actually went on to play pro in England after he graduated, his master's. But then he wanted to coach. And I said to him, well, what is it about coaching that you want to study? Right? So I kind of figure, him being a superstar would want to study something about the mindset of a talented player. And he goes, and this is when I knew I had a great grad student. He says, well, I played on some teams that had difficult athletes. And I thought that we lost championships because people were difficult and we weren't able to control them. The coaches didn't manage them well. He says, and I don't think there's much research on difficult athletes in sport, and I'd like to study that. And when he said that, I was like, this is great. Let's look at a culture of excellence by how you handle difficult people, because everything we were doing was always about the good things. So as you can see, Liam is now an assistant coach at Acadia University, and he is also coaching an assistant coach on our Team Canada para sledge hockey team. And that's where you can see him in those pictures. So he's going to have a great career ahead of him coaching. And I want to share with you his master's thesis. How do you handle difficult or manage difficult athletes? So the first thing we learned, so we interviewed some of the most successful hockey coaches in Canada, people who'd been doing it for a long time and had experiences with difficult athletes. And the first summary or the point that we picked up from our study was, these coaches said, when I first started coaching, I couldn't identify the athlete early. It took me a long time to realize the signs. And by the time that I had realized it and tried to address it, it was a full-blown crap storm on our team. And what they said is that as they gained experience, they recognized the signs really quickly. And that's what they said. The key to putting out the fire is you see it quick and you douse that fire right away. So that was step number one. And they said you really only get that with experience. But not only identifying the athlete, but you also have to make it clear to the athlete, especially if he or she is a talented athlete, that they're not getting special privileges. One of the coaches said the most effective strategies for dealing with difficult athletes while preserving the team culture is explaining the expectations, the consequences, and then reinforcing them. So they said, like, when they first started, they were a little hesitant about putting out the fires or addressing it if it was one of the talented players on their team. They would give that person more leniency or more rope. And they said as they gained more experience in coaching, they realized this doesn't work. You have to treat all your athletes the same way, the same goals, with the same expectations. And if they break the rules, you have to hold them accountable. And that can be tricky, right? For especially young coaches, because you don't want to upset your talented player and then don't see eye to eye. But what these coaches said is the really good athletes accepted the criticism and became better people and better players because of it. So that was something we learned from our study. Have clear expectations. And the coaches also learned that as they gained experience, they made these expectations clear at the beginning. Whereas some other coaches might try to put out a fire when it happens. These coaches could be proactive and say, here's the rules of order on our team. Step out of line, here's the consequences. One of the things that also was very interesting is that these coaches were aware that if they branded these athletes as a troubled athlete, that it could derail their athletes' careers. So these were coaches who were coaching players the year they were about to be drafted in the NHL. So just before they would become a pro. And this was really interesting. I didn't expect this result to come up. The coaches said that if I label this athlete a problem athlete, kick the athlete off the team, suspend the athlete, do something drastic, this player's career is probably going to be ruined, and their chances at being successful will be very low. And they said it, and the reason they said what they tried to do was work with the athlete first and turn around the athlete. Because they said they realized that the athletes that were coming to them, some came from toxic environments, either at home, at school, or on hockey teams. And they behaved a certain way because of how they were raised. Not everyone came polished and, went to private schools and had the best of the best advantages and maybe was more mature and polished than some people that came from lesser means. So what the coaches said is they really took the time to try and reach out and transform the person. And this is one quote that a coach said: you never want to identify players as troublemakers or something that's going to become a reality. You don't want to brand them as troublemaker because I find that perpetuates the troublemaking. So how neat and cool is that? Like they're saying, we're going to get some wild child, some troubled athletes coming in. My job as a coach is first to communicate and try and turn this person around. Now, I do want to say, having said that, they also said there's a certain distance they go before they do cut the rope. Like it's not, I'm going to let you keep messing up and I'm going to continue to keep you on the team. I'm going to try. I'm not going to brand you a troublemaker. I'm not going to kick you off right away. I'm going to try and work with you. But if this persists and you don't do well, you're gone. And I guess it takes a lot of experience to be able to know when the time is right to do that. But these coaches said that over time they were able to develop the right formula, as far as I call it. And we called this maintaining the foundation. So that's sort of the first part of our results. The next one is repairing the foundation. So how do you connect with an athlete that's troubled? What's important for you? And our coaches said utmost importance is connecting with them on a personal level. Get to know your athletes. Like there's a big body of literature on coach-athlete relationship. That's what came out here clearly. These coaches said, I need to understand who my athlete is. If he is misbehaving, there's probably a reason. There's probably triggers or events that have happened in his past. And the coaches said, I can't just expect him to come in and change immediately. I have to get to know him. I have to go for lunch with him. I have to sit down privately and have talks with him, unrelated to hockey, to find out what makes this athlete tick. And I think that's important, certainly in my role as department chair. If I see something going unwell with one of our faculty members, I call them in my office and I just say, how are things going? I'll say, I've noticed this, and you're not smiling. You look a little unhappy. You seem more tense or aggravated. What's going on? Same thing with my graduate students. If something's not going well, or maybe they're having a hard time, or they don't seem to be happy, call them in and talk to them. Connect with people on a personal level. I think that's a really important sign of being a great leader and showing people that you care about them. And that's something that came up in our serial winning coaches, came up with the great coaches I've met, like John Wooden, is show people you care. One coach that I worked with about 30 years ago, a basketball coach, a women's university basketball coach, said to me, my athletes don't care how much I know until they know how much I care. And I've heard other people use that same quote, so I'm not sure who coined it, but I think it really carries over in life, in sports and outside of sports. So we talked about repairing the foundation. Now, what are some of the things that coaches can actually do to turn around a problem athlete? And the first thing that our coaches talked about was having the right team around them. So make sure you're insulating your athletes with a team of people who are on the same page as you are. And this is everybody. This is not just assistant coaches, because right away you're thinking, well, it's just my assistant coaches. No, it's your equipment people. it's the management of the team, even something that is important in junior hockey. These young men who move away from home have to live with a family in the community. It's called your billet family. And the team pays, and they choose their billets carefully to make sure the athletes are in a good, solid home foundation. And our coaches said, like, it's important that I talk to the billets so I know if something is off with my athletes. I know to talk to my assistant coaches, to the team, the equipment manager. So all of these things are important. So, certainly if you're in a position, so myself as a chair, I have to have a graduate program director and an undergraduate program director, two people that help me run those two programs. For me, it's important that I'm on the same page with them. I have regular meetings with them. If there's something going on, a lot of times the professors will complain to them instead of coming to me, and we talk it out and work together. So I think the social actors who play a vital role carry over in all parts of life. And how about the teammates? The leadership group is really important. One coach said, I hold leadership meetings every 2 weeks. I take my captains and assistant captains out for dinner. The captains and assistant captains are like business middle managers. I'm the CEO of the company, and I want to teach my leadership group that this is their team. I have them bring me problems they see in the team environment, and I give them problems we as coaches see, and I ask, okay, how do we solve these problems? And that's something we find with a lot of these great coaches is they have very solid athlete leaders that they really take the time to try and cultivate and make sure, like, teaching leadership is important. It doesn't just naturally occur. And it seems from these coaches we've spoken to is they take the time to try and teach and cultivate this positive athlete leadership group that they feel will be helpful in instances when they have a troubled athlete. So again, it's not just waiting for the troubled athlete to appear to then sort of calling your team leaders in for a quick meeting. It's talking with them fluidly all the time so that when something does arise, it's a natural progression. So just to conclude and some of the takeaway points from my talk, first off, difficult athletes are present in most team environments. They inhibit satisfaction, effectiveness, and performance. And I think this carries over to life as well. The business literature certainly shows it. If you're working in a lab right now, you probably would agree with that. It's unquestioned that difficult athletes or difficult employees or difficult colleagues are bad for your happiness, your enjoyment, your mental health, and your performance. So there's 4 takeaways that came from this study. There's actually a few more, but 4 main ones and that I shared with you. How to manage the difficult athlete is 1, identify the person early. 2, set clear rules and expectations at the very beginning of the season and make sure that you do not set special rules or give special favors to your star or most talented players. 3, establish quality relationships with them. And 4, make sure that you surround yourself with people who have the same vision as you do, who have the same goals as you do, whom you can trust and communicate with at all times during the season, not just when times are bad. So, merci. Thank you for listening. Hopefully, I've given you some food for thought, some things to think about, and I'll be happy to answer any questions for the next little while. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloom. Is there any question? Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? We have a question from Diago Sousa. He says, do you think there are occasions where an individual talent is worth investing that 80% effort, or is it should be better to cut the evil right before spreading and changing the team culture and then invest that 80% effort eventually through the non-trouble individuals?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. Very good one too. Yeah. So how would I answer that? Okay, let me put myself in the position of if I'm a coach. So if you're a coach, teamwork is important to win a championship, right? But you got to have talent. So if you have someone that's uber talented and you're a young coach that's trying to make your mark, are you going to just cut that person without making maybe a little more extra effort that Tiago was asking? I'm going to say that my research would say if someone's that troubled and difficult, you cut them. But if I'm putting myself in the position of a coach or a leader, I think that they'll probably go a little extra mile, a little bit longer to try and cultivate that talent. But I think if you do it too long, you're going to run into troubles, Tiago. But do I think you should maybe make a little more effort for the uber talented one? I think it would. I think every coach would say I probably would go a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the answer. That's exactly what we have been seeing in our national soccer team. We used to have a very good talent there. And I saw the coach investing a lot of time, a lot of effort on that guy. But it seems that his way of life was influencing the whole team. And they were investing too long on that guy, before maybe cutting the zero by the root, But yeah, thank you. Thank you for your answer.
No, you're welcome. And I think that's the one thing I've learned from dealing with these coaches is this is a skill. Like learning when to cut a player and when to give them the extra time is a skill. I think it's like a soft skill. And I think it's something that only comes with time, time and experience. It'll be more difficult for a young coach to really be able to handle something that toxic. But I think these coaches were all experienced. They had averaged about 15 years coaching, and it was just kind of clear to us like they knew the formula. They knew how far to go and when to say, okay, that's enough. Like now you're ruining things. But I think young coaches, it's really tough. Expect them to be able to do that effectively. Good question. Thanks.
Is there any other questions? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions for Professor Bloom? No? Okay, so I'm going to pass the word to Manat and Anne-Charlotte for the survey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Professor Bloom, for such a lovely presentation. It was really great. So we would very much like if you can please fill the satisfaction survey that will be shared by Anne-Charlotte in the chat box. Thank you so much. Anne.
Okay, so everyone can